They called it the Society Wedding of the Year. Whitmore money marrying Winters' potential. What they didn't know was Evelyn Hart Winters hadn't come to celebrate. As she adjusted her pearls in the guest suite of the Whitmore estate, the elderly woman touched the hidden ring in her pocket, evidence of a legacy stolen decades ago. Howard Whitmore had built his empire by erasing her husband's medical breakthrough from history, never imagining the quiet black grandmother in the back row owned 39% of his company through shell corporations. Evelyn hadn't spent 40 years building invisible power to watch her grandson marry into the family that destroyed hers. The Whitmores had mastered appearances, but Evelyn had mastered patience. Today, their carefully constructed dynasty would begin to crumble, not with a shout, but with the quiet click of digital evidence finally finding light. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The Whitmore family estate, sprawled across 30 acres of manicured perfection, its white columns and sprawling gardens visible from the winding driveway, where luxury cars formed an impressive line. From above, the scene resembled a painting. Ladies in flowing designer gowns formed colorful clusters against the emerald lawns, while men in tailored suits congregated near the outdoor bar. News vans lined the perimeter, their satellite dishes tilted skyward, capturing glimpses of what would surely be the society wedding of the year. Among the gleaming Bentleys and Rolls-Royces, a modest Toyota Camry pulled up to the valet stand. The young attendant, busy fawning over a red Ferrari, barely noticed as Julian Winters stepped out, straightening his suit jacket before walking around to help his grandmother from the passenger side. "We made it, Grandma," Julian said, offering his arm with a warm smile. Evelyn Hart Winters emerged with the dignified grace that had defined her for all of her 73 years. Her silver hair was pulled into an elegant chignon, her dark skin still smooth despite her age. She wore a simple navy dress, expensive but understated, with a single string of pearls. "So we have," she replied, her voice calm and measured as she surveyed the estate. Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or memory, but it vanished quickly behind her composed expression. The valet finally noticed them and rushed over, his smile dimming slightly as he approached. "Welcome to the Whitmore estate," he said, his gaze darting between Julian and the modest car. "Thank you," Julian replied, handing over his keys. He felt the subtle shift in the young man's demeanor, the quick assessment and dismissal. It was something he'd grown accustomed to in the 3 years he'd been dating Celeste Whitmore. As they walked toward the main house, Julian's small family contingent gathered near the entrance. His mother Barbara, his uncle Thomas, and his 17-year-old sister Ava, who was busy adjusting the settings on her phone's camera. "Put that away, Ava," Barbara whispered. "You know how these people feel about social media." Ava rolled her eyes but tucked the phone into her small purse. "These people," she muttered. "You mean my future in-laws?" Julian squeezed his sister's shoulder. "Best behavior today, okay? This means a lot to Celeste." Before Ava could respond, a flurry of activity at the main entrance caught their attention. Celeste Whitmore emerged, her blonde hair shimmering in the sunlight, wearing a white sundress that somehow looked both casual and worth a month's rent. Her face lit up when she spotted Julian. "You're here!" she exclaimed, rushing toward him. She kissed his cheek, then turned to embrace Evelyn. "Mrs. Winters, I'm so glad you made it." "I wouldn't miss my grandson's wedding," Evelyn replied, her smile warm but reserved. "Your home is lovely." "Thank you," Celeste said, though the estate wasn't her achievement. She linked her arm through Julian's. "Come on, I want to show you around before everyone arrives for the welcome brunch." As they walked away, Julian glanced back at his grandmother, who gave him a reassuring nod. He felt the familiar tug between his worlds, the humble, hard-working family that raised him, and the glittering, privileged sphere that Celeste inhabited. Once, they were alone in the rose garden. Celeste's shoulders relaxed visibly. She turned to Julian with genuine affection in her eyes. "I've missed you," she said, touching his face. "These last few days have been crazy." Julian kissed her softly. "Nervous?" "Excited," she insisted, though her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her dress, but also stressed. You know how my family can be about everything being perfect. They do have high standards, Julian acknowledged, careful to keep his tone neutral. It's just important to them that everything goes smoothly. The Whitmore name carries certain expectations. Julian nodded, studying her face. I notice my grandmother's room is in the East Wing. That's pretty far from the main events. A shadow crossed Celeste's features, so brief he almost missed it. Mom thought she might appreciate the quiet. It's more private there. She's not staff, Celeste. She's my family. I know that, Celeste said quickly, squeezing his hand. It's just, the arrangements were made weeks ago. I can't change everything. Now, Julian decided not to press the issue. Your father seemed surprised to see her. Celeste shrugged. Dad's been distracted with work. He barely knows who's coming to his own daughter's wedding. She brightened artificially, changing the subject. The brunch is about to start. We should head back. As they returned to the main lawn, Julian couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The way Howard Whitmore had looked at his grandmother. It wasn't the polite disinterest of a man meeting his future in-law for the first time. There had been recognition there, and something else Julian couldn't place. The welcome brunch was set up on the sprawling terrace overlooking the estate's private lake. Round tables adorned with fresh flowers accommodated the 100-odd guests who had arrived for the pre-wedding festivities. Waiters in crisp uniforms circulated with champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. Evelyn sat at a table with Barbara and Thomas, her posture perfect, her expression pleasantly neutral as she observed the crowd. Julian noticed how several guests glanced her way, then deliberately chose seats at other tables. His jaw tightened, but a warning look from his mother kept him from commenting. From a nearby table, an older woman in an expensive pink suit leaned toward her companion. I didn't realize the groom's family was, diverse, she said, her voice carrying just enough to be overheard. Howard's always been a bit of a social experimenter, her male companion replied with a chuckle. Remember that charity initiative for those urban schools? Same thing, different package. Evelyn gave no indication she'd heard them, but Julian noticed her fingers tighten slightly around her water glass. He started to rise, but his grandmother placed a hand on his arm. Not worth it, she murmured. Save your battles. Across the terrace, Howard Whitmore stood tall and imposing, his silver hair and tailored suit projecting authority and old money. His gaze swept the gathering until it landed on Evelyn. For a moment, something passed between them, a current of recognition that made Howard's confident smile falter. Evelyn met his stare evenly, her expression giving nothing away. Then, deliberately, she raised her glass in a small toast. Howard turned away, engaging a nearby guest in sudden, animated conversation. Near the dessert table, a commotion drew Julian's attention. His sister Ava had her phone out, recording the elegant spread for her social media followers when a young man in his 20s, Julian recognized him as Celeste's cousin Brandon, stepped into her frame. Excuse me, he said with exaggerated politeness. The help isn't supposed to be filming. It's a privacy issue. Ava lowered her phone, her expression hardening. I'm not the help. I'm the groom's sister. Brandon's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. Oh, my mistake. You just looked so comfortable serving yourself back there. Julian was across the terrace in seconds, Celeste hurrying behind him. Is there a problem? He asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. Brandon's smirk faltered. At Julian's approach, just a misunderstanding about the photography policy. My sister isn't staff, Julian said clearly, his voice carrying to nearby tables. She's family, my family. An uncomfortable silence fell over the nearest tables. Celeste stepped forward, placing a hand on Julian's arm. Brandon, this is Ava, Julian's sister, she said with forced brightness. Ava, my cousin Brandon. I'm so sorry for the confusion. Brandon's had too much champagne already. She laughed lightly, attempting to diffuse the tension. Brandon shrugged, not quite apologetic. Honest mistake. Ava slipped her phone back into her purse, her eyes downcast. "It's fine," she said, though her voice made it clear it wasn't. Julian guided his sister away, his anger simmering beneath his composed exterior. When they were out of earshot, Ava whispered, "This is going to be a long weekend, isn't it?" Julian couldn't disagree. Later that afternoon, as guests dispersed for pre-dinner activities, Julian found Evelyn sitting alone in the garden, watching birds at a nearby feeder. "You're quiet today, Grandma," he said, taking the seat beside her. "I'm observing," she replied. "It's what I do best." Julian hesitated. "Those people at Brunch are not the first to underestimate me and won't be the last." She patted his hand. "I didn't raise your mother to shrink from uncomfortable rooms, and she didn't raise you that way either. It feels like we're outsiders here. Perhaps that's because we are." She looked toward the main house, where preparations for the rehearsal dinner were underway. But outsiders see things insiders miss. Julian studied his grandmother's face, noting the steel beneath her gentle demeanor. He remembered her strict household rules growing up, the way she drilled into him the importance of education, of preparation, of never showing weakness. As a child, he'd thought her overly severe. As an adult, he was beginning to understand. "You never talk about your past," he said, "before you married Grandpa." She smiled mysteriously. "Some stories are best saved for the right moment." The wedding. Rehearsal began promptly at 4, overseen by a renowned planner whose client list included celebrities and royalty. The wedding party assembled in the estate's private chapel, where Julian and Celeste practiced their procession and vows under the critical eye of Celeste's mother, Vivian Whitmore. "Julian, darling," Vivian called out after the third run-through. "Could you stand a bit straighter? Shoulders back, chin up, the photographers will be capturing every angle." Julian adjusted his posture, catching his mother's sympathetic glance from the front pew. Vivian then turned her attention to Evelyn, who sat quietly observing. "Mrs. Winters, for the ceremony tomorrow, perhaps something a bit brighter?" "That navy is lovely but awfully somber for a summer wedding." "My dress for tomorrow is quite suitable," Evelyn replied evenly. "But thank you for your concern." Vivian's smile tightened. "We just want everything to be perfect. The photos will be in several magazines. I'm sure they'll be lovely regardless of my attire," Evelyn said, her tone pleasant but firm enough to end the conversation. As the rehearsal concluded, Julian felt the weight of expectations pressing down on him. When the others filed out toward the dining room, he hung back with his grandmother. "Is this a mistake?" he asked quietly. "Celeste is wonderful, but her family—" Evelyn considered him thoughtfully. "Marriage isn't just between two people. It's between two histories, two futures." She straightened his tie with practiced hands. "You only get one wedding. But they're masks. They last forever." Before Julian could ask what she meant, she reached into her pocket and withdrew something small, a gold ring with an intricate design. For a moment, she seemed about to show it to him, but then she closed her hand around it and returned it to her pocket. "Come," she said. "They're waiting for us." As they walked toward the rehearsal dinner, Julian couldn't shake the feeling that beneath the smiles and champagne toasts, something significant was unfolding, something only his grandmother seemed to fully understand. The rehearsal dinner transformed the Whitmore Estate's grand dining hall into a showcase of wealth and taste. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables draped in white linen and adorned with arrangements of white roses and orchids. The air hummed with conversation and laughter as waiters circulated with trays of appetizers and champagne flutes. At the head table, Julian sat beside Celeste, acutely aware of the divide between their families. The Winters occupied only a small portion of the massive table, while the Whitmore relatives sprawled across the remaining seats, their voices growing louder with each round of drinks. Howard Whitmore stood, tapping his glass for attention. The room quieted as he surveyed the gathering with the confidence of a man accustomed to command. "Welcome, everyone," he began, his voice resonant and practiced. "Tomorrow my beautiful daughter Celeste will marry Julian, a young man who has proven himself worthy of the Whitmore name through his intelligence, ambition, and character. Julian felt Celeste squeeze his hand under the table. He smiled at her, pushing aside the implication that marrying into the Whitmore family was some sort of achievement rather than a partnership. Tonight, we celebrate not just their union, but the joining of our families, Howard continued, raising his glass toward the Winters family with a politician's smile, to new beginnings. The toast was met with enthusiastic applause. Julian noticed several guests surreptitiously filming with their phones, no doubt for social media, the very activity for which Ava had been reprimanded earlier. As dinner progressed, a steady stream of relatives took turns making speeches. Some were heartfelt, others seemed more concerned with name-dropping or mentioning their own achievements. The wine flowed freely, and with it, inhibitions began to loosen. When Brandon Whitmore rose from his seat, his face flushed with alcohol, Julian felt a prickle of unease. The young man swayed slightly, grinning at the assembled guests. "I'd like to propose a toast to the happy couple," Brandon announced, his words slightly slurred. "To my cousin Celeste, who's always had impeccable taste, in fashion, in food, and now in diversity initiatives." A nervous titter ran through the crowd. Julian stiffened. Beside him, Celeste's smile became fixed. "Julian's a great guy," Brandon continued, emboldened by the attention. "Smart, hard-working, clearly didn't inherit those qualities from the Whitmore side." This earned genuine laughter, relaxing the tension momentarily. "And let's not forget, his charming family," Brandon went on, gesturing expansively. "Especially his grandmother, who's brought such cultural enrichment to our gathering." Brandon's grin widened as he caught Evelyn's eye across the table. Then, in what he clearly thought was good humor, he affected a stereotypical accent, nothing like Evelyn's actual refined speech. "Child, don't you worry," he drawled, mimicking what he imagined to be her voice. "She's not here to clean, just to bless us with civil rights history." A shocked silence fell for a split second before nervous laughter erupted from several tables. Howard's face darkened, and Vivian looked mortified, but neither intervened. Celeste gave a strained smile, clearly uncomfortable but paralyzed by social expectations. Julian rose abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The laughter died instantly. "Julian," Celeste began, reaching for his arm. He ignored her, looking directly at Brandon with cold fury. "My grandmother deserves your respect. All of our families do." Brandon rolled his eyes, still riding high on alcohol and attention. "It was a joke, man. Lighten up." Julian looked around the table, taking in the uncomfortable but largely silent faces of Celeste's family. Even Howard and Vivian seemed more embarrassed by the disruption than the offensive remark itself. "Come on, Grandma," Julian said quietly, turning to Evelyn. "Let's get some air." Evelyn rose with dignity, her expression composed despite the humiliation she'd just endured. Barbara and Thomas stood as well, followed by Ava, whose eyes shone with angry tears. As they walked out, whispers followed them. Julian heard someone mutter, "So sensitive," and another voice respond, "What did they expect?" In the cool evening air of the terrace, Julian paced angrily while his mother tried to calm him down. "How could they just sit there?" he demanded. "How could Celeste not say anything?" "Julian," Evelyn said firmly, interrupting his tirade, "this isn't the time or place for an outburst. They disrespected you in front of everyone. I'm supposed to just smile and take it?" Evelyn placed a hand on his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Power is patience," she said quietly. "Watch and wait. Reaction gives them control. Strategy gives us options." Julian shook his head in frustration. "Why don't they respect us, Grandma? After all this time, all these dinners and holidays with Celeste's family, why are we still outsiders?" Evelyn's eyes, when they met his, held decades of hard-won wisdom. "Because they never expected us to be in the room," she answered simply. "Our presence challenges the story they tell themselves about who belongs." The glass doors slid open, and Celeste emerged, her face flushed with embarrassment. She approached tentatively, wringing her hands. "Julian, please come back inside," she pleaded. Brandon's drunk. He says stupid things when he drinks. He didn't mean anything by it. Julian stared at her in disbelief. He mocked my grandmother's race in front of everyone and you're defending him? I'm not defending him. It was a terrible joke, but you're making this into a bigger deal than it needs to be. A bigger deal? You mean I'm making this racial? Celeste faltered. That's not what I meant. Yes, it is, Julian said quietly. That's exactly what you meant. It's only a big deal because I'm pointing out what happened instead of laughing it off. Celeste looked around helplessly, as if seeking backup from Julian's family. Finding none, she lowered her voice. My parents have journalists here, Julian. This weekend is important for my father's business connections. More important than basic respect for the family you're marrying into. Through the glass doors, Julian could see Howard Whitmore watching their exchange with a guarded expression. The older man's eyes were fixed not on his daughter or future son-in-law, but on Evelyn, his gaze calculating and wary. Celeste touched Julian's arm beseechingly. Please, Julian. For me. We can talk about this later, in private. Before Julian could respond, the doors opened again, and Vivian emerged, her social smile firmly in place. Everything all right out here? She asked brightly, as if there had been a minor misunderstanding rather than a deeply offensive incident. Just getting some fresh air, Evelyn replied smoothly before Julian could speak. It's a lovely evening. Vivian's relief was palpable. Wonderful. We're about to serve dessert, and then the band will start. The young people usually dance until midnight. As Vivian shepherded Celeste back inside, Howard appeared in the doorway. He hesitated, then approached Evelyn directly, ignoring the rest of the family. Mrs. Winters, he said in a low voice. A word of advice. You're playing with fire. That woman is not what she seems. With that cryptic warning, he returned to the party, leaving Julian staring after him in confusion. What did he mean by that? Julian asked his grandmother once they were alone. Evelyn watched Howard's retreating figure with a hint of amusement. He wasn't talking to me, she said enigmatically. He was talking to himself. Inside, the party continued as if nothing had happened. Brandon had been quietly removed from the room, and the band struck up a cheerful tune. Julian's family chose to retire early, citing fatigue from travel. Later that night, in her room in the East Wing, Ava sat cross-legged on her bed, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone screen. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she uploaded a video to her social media accounts. Tonight at my brother's rehearsal dinner, she typed, this is how his fiancé's family treated our grandmother, who raised us after our dad died, who put my brother through college, who has more dignity in her little finger than all of these people combined. She hesitated for just a moment before pressing share, watching as the video began to spread, first to her followers and then beyond, gaining traction with each passing minute. The hashtag #Whitmore Wedding Shame appeared beneath the post, a digital match thrown onto dry tinder. In his own room, Julian sat on the edge of his bed, contemplating the events of the evening. A soft knock at the door revealed his Uncle Thomas, his expression troubled. Julian, he said without preamble, we need to talk about Evelyn. What about her? Thomas glanced down the hallway nervously. Has she ever told you who she really is? What she did before she married your grandfather? Julian frowned. She was a teacher, right? Before she started managing Grandpa's business affairs. Thomas shook his head slowly. There's so much more to it. I've tried to get her to tell the family for years, but she always says it's in the past. Tell us what exactly? It's not my place, Thomas replied. But after tonight, maybe it's time you knew. Ask her, Julian. Ask her about the companies, the patents, the board positions. Ask her why a family like the Whitmores would be so uncomfortable around her. Before Julian could press for more details, Thomas withdrew, leaving him with more questions than answers. In her own room, Evelyn sat at the antique writing desk, calmly reviewing papers from a leather portfolio. The room was quiet, except for the occasional scratch of her pen. When a discreet knock sounded at her door, she didn't seem surprised. A man in a dark suit entered, his presence suggesting authority rather than service. He handed her a sealed leather folder. It's all there, he said quietly. Financial records, offshore accounts, the original patent applications. Everything you asked for. Evelyn nodded, not opening the folder. And the board? Still unaware of your connection. But there are whispers. Questions about the silent partner. Let them whisper, Evelyn replied, her voice soft but resolute. For now. The man hesitated. The situation has escalated with the video. This could get messy. I've handled messy before. This is different. Your grandson is involved now. Evelyn considered this, her expression thoughtful. Then perhaps it's time for certain truths to see daylight. She placed the folder in the desk drawer and locked it. Contingency plans? In place as always. Good. That will be all for tonight. After he left, Evelyn moved to the window, gazing out at the moonlit grounds of the Whitmore estate. The grand house, the manicured gardens, the artificial lake, all symbols of wealth and power. All built on foundations that were perhaps less solid than they appeared. A memory surfaced. Evelyn in her 40s, standing before a panel of stern-faced men in an international boardroom, her voice clear and unwavering as she addressed them. Control. The money, and you control the voice. Control the voice, and you own history. She had learned that lesson the hard way. Now, decades later, as the Whitmore wedding teetered on the edge of scandal, perhaps it was time for a history lesson of her own. Morning light filtered through the curtains of the Whitmore estate as a very different atmosphere settled over the previously festive grounds. The wedding was still scheduled for that afternoon, but the estate had transformed overnight. News vans lined the entrance gates, reporters shouting questions at anyone who entered or exited. Security guards formed a perimeter, keeping the media at bay while staff rushed to maintain the illusion that all was well. Inside the main house, Vivian Whitmore paced the breakfast room, her cell phone pressed to her ear. "I don't care what it takes," she hissed. "Get that video taken down. Pay whoever you need to pay." Howard sat at the table, scrolling through his tablet with growing dismay. The hashtag Whitmore Wedding Shame was trending, with millions of views already. Clips of Brandon's offensive toast had been edited and reshared thousands of times, with commenters expressing outrage at the family's behavior. "It's too late," Howard said, his voice unnaturally calm. "It's gone viral," Vivian shot, him a venomous look. "Nothing is too late when you have enough money. Our PR team is drafting a statement claiming the video was manipulated." "Denying it will only make things worse," Howard replied, rubbing his temples. "Dozens of people were in that room. They all heard what Brandon said. Then we'll say Brandon was drunk, that he's checking into rehab, that it doesn't reflect our family's values." Vivian snapped. "We will handle this, Howard. We always do." Celeste entered the room, her eyes puffy from crying. "Mom, Dad, what are we going to do? Julian isn't answering my calls." Howard barely glanced at his daughter. "The wedding will proceed as planned. The guests are already here, the vendors are paid, and the press—" He trailed off, considering. "The press can be managed." "Julian's sister posted that video," Celeste said, her voice trembling. "How can we just pretend nothing happened?" "Because that's what our family does," Vivian replied sharply. "We rise above petty drama. Now go get ready. The hair and makeup. Team is waiting in your suite." After Celeste left, Howard closed the door and turned to his wife, his expression grave. "There's something else we need to discuss. Something about Julian's grandmother. That woman is the least of our concerns right now." "No," Howard cut her off, his voice dropping to a whisper. "She is our primary concern. I recognized her last night. It took me a while to place her, but I'm certain now." Vivian stared at her husband. "What are you talking about?" "I need to check something," Howard said, already heading for the door. "Keep Celeste focused on the wedding. I'll handle the rest." In his private study, Howard unlocked a hidden panel behind a painting, revealing a wall safe. He entered a complex combination and retrieved a dusty folder marked Confidential. His hands shook slightly as he spread old photographs and documents across his desk. There, in a yellowed newspaper clipping, was a much younger Evelyn Hart Winters, standing beside a distinguished black man in a laboratory coat. The headline read, "Patterson Medical Technologies announces breakthrough device." Howard's finger traced the caption. Dr. James Winters and his wife, Evelyn Hart Winters, at the site's unveiling of their revolutionary cardiac monitoring system. Further down in the article, a quote jumped out. The Whitmore Group has acquired exclusive rights to manufacture and distribute the Winters-Patterson device in what analysts call a game-changing development for both companies. Howard rifled through more documents until he found what he was looking for. A government file stamped EWINT 731. Most of its contents had been redacted, but what remained made Howard's face drain of color. In the guest wing, Julian knocked on his grandmother's door, his expression troubled. When she opened it, he entered without preamble. "We should leave," he said. "I can't go through with this wedding, not after last night." Evelyn regarded him calmly. "Running solves nothing, Julian. I didn't raise you to run. Let's finish what we started." "What exactly did we start, Grandma?" Julian asked, studying her face. "Uncle Thomas said I should ask you about your past, about companies and patents." Something flickered in Evelyn's eyes. Caution, perhaps, or calculation. "Thomas always had poor timing," she said with a small smile. "But perhaps he's right. It's time you knew certain things." Before she could continue, Julian's phone buzzed with a text from Celeste. "Please talk to me. I'm so sorry about last night. I love you." Julian silenced the phone. "Why does Howard Whitmore look at you like he's seen a ghost? What history do you have with these people?" Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed, motioning for Julian to join her. "Your grandfather and I created something important once, something that changed medicine forever." Her voice softened with memory. "The Whitmore family. They saw an opportunity. They took what wasn't theirs to take." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that power rarely changes hands willingly," Evelyn replied. "But sometimes patience is rewarded with justice." Before she could elaborate, Julian's sister Ava burst into the room, her face flushed with excitement. "The video has over 2 million views. People are canceling the Whitmores left and right. Their stock is dropping. It's all over the news." Julian groaned. "Ava, what were you thinking?" "I was thinking someone needed to expose these people for who they really are," Ava replied defiantly. "They humiliated Grandma in front of everyone." "And now you've turned our private family matter into public spectacle," Julian said. "How is that helping?" Ava's enthusiasm dimmed. "I thought you'd be glad. They deserve to be called out." "Perhaps," Evelyn said gently. "But timing and method matter in these things." She turned to Julian. "Your sister acted from the heart. Now, we must think with our heads." Outside the estate, a sleek black car pulled through the security checkpoint. Inside, Vivian was frantically calling board members of Whitmore Industries, assuring them that the situation was under control. When her assistant informed her that an emergency board meeting had been called without her knowledge, her composure finally cracked. "What do you mean, unauthorized? I'm the chairwoman?" Her face paled as she listened to the response. "Who called the meeting? Who?" In the Whitmore Company headquarters downtown, 12 board members sat around a polished conference table. At the head, a lawyer read from a formal document. The silent partner, E. Hart Winters Holdings, which owns 39% of Whitmore Trust shares, has invoked Section 7 of the corporate charter, calling for a vote of no confidence in current leadership. Murmurs spread through the room. "E. Hart Winters?" one board member asked. "That shell company has never exercised voting rights before. Who's behind it?" The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "According to these documents, E. Hart Winters Holdings has been a silent partner since 1983, when the company acquired Patterson Medical Technologies." At the Whitmore estate, Celeste sat in her bridal suite, surrounded by dresses, flowers, and wedding gifts. Her bridesmaids fluttered around her, but their excited chatter felt hollow in light of the morning's events. When her mother entered, Celeste immediately noted her distress. "What's wrong?" Vivian forced a smile. "Nothing you need to worry about, darling. The ceremony begins in 3 hours. Focus on becoming a beautiful bride." Did you talk to Julian? Your father is handling that situation. Celeste stood abruptly. This isn't a situation to be handled, Mom. This is my marriage. Exactly, Vivian snapped, her composure slipping. Your marriage to a family that is currently trying to destroy everything we've built. Did you know about his grandmother? Did Julian tell you who she really is? Celeste frowned. What are you talking about? Vivian waved her hand dismissively. Ask your father. He's the one who brought that woman into our lives all those years ago. As Vivian departed, Celeste slipped away from her attendants and made her way to her father's study. The door was ajar and she could hear Howard's agitated voice inside. I don't care what it takes, he was saying into his phone. Transfer every liquid asset to the Cayman account. Now before the markets close, Celeste pushed the door open. Dad? Howard startled, quickly ending his call. Celeste, shouldn't you be getting ready? What's going on? She demanded. Mom's acting strange. You're hiding in here making secret calls and nobody will tell me what's happening with Julian. Howard's expression softened. Come in, sweetheart. Close the door. He led her to a chair and poured her a small glass of brandy, something he'd never done before. There are things about the Winters family that I should have told you sooner. Like what? Howard took a deep breath. Julian's grandmother, Evelyn Hart Winters, once worked with her husband on a medical device, a revolutionary cardiac monitor that saved countless lives. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Our company acquired the rights to that device. So there were complications with the acquisition, legal gray areas. That device became the foundation of the Whitmore medical division. It's been our most profitable product line for decades. Celeste stared at her father. Are you saying you stole their invention? Howard's expression hardened. I'm saying business is complicated. Contracts are open to interpretation. The point is, Evelyn Hart Winters has spent decades building a case against our family. And now, through Julian, she's found her way in. That's ridiculous, Celeste exclaimed. Julian loves me. He's not part of some conspiracy. Maybe not knowingly, Howard conceded, but his grandmother is dangerous, Celeste. She built an empire from nothing, working through proxies and shell companies. She owns significant shares in our business through offshore accounts. She's been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And you think my wedding is that moment? That's insane, Dad. Howard shook his head sadly. The timing is no coincidence. The viral video, the sudden media interest, the emergency board meeting. She's orchestrated all of it. Elsewhere in the estate, Evelyn Hart Winters left her room, alone, walking with purpose toward the small museum that showcased the Whitmore family history. The room was filled with photographs, artifacts, and plaques detailing the family's rise to prominence over generations. She moved slowly from display to display, noting the carefully curated narrative, old money, aristocratic connections, brilliant business acumen. Near the back wall, she paused before a glass case containing early prototypes of medical devices, including the cardiac monitor that had made the family billions. A tour guide approached, smiling professionally. Interested in the Whitmore medical innovations? Very, Evelyn replied, studying the display card that credited Howard Whitmore with spearheading the development of the device. This is a nice lie you've built here. The guide's smile faltered. Excuse me? Nothing, Evelyn said pleasantly, just admiring the creative storytelling. As she left the museum, she checked her watch. The wedding was 2 hours away, but other wheels were already in motion, events set in place decades ago finally coming to fruition. In Julian's room, he opened a small trunk his grandmother had given him that morning. Inside, he found old ledgers, correspondence with banks and political figures, and photographs of his grandfather with various dignitaries. One document particularly caught his attention. A patent application with both his grandparents' names clearly listed as primary inventors, with annotations showing how the patent had been quietly reassigned to Whitmore Industries through a complex series of legal maneuvers. Julian's phone rang, an unknown number. When he answered, a professional voice spoke. Mr. Winters? I'm calling on behalf of certain interested parties. We've received intelligence that Whitmore Industries is attempting to liquidate your grandmother's holdings. They're moving funds offshore as we speak. Julian frowned. What holdings? Who is this? A friend, the voice replied. They don't know. It's her yet. The shell company has maintained anonymity for decades, but they suspect and they're trying to protect themselves. From what? From justice, Mr. Winters. From the reckoning that's been a long time coming. After the call ended, Julian sat heavily on his bed. The documents spread around him like pieces of a puzzle he was only beginning to comprehend. His grandmother had built something important, something that had been taken from her, and now, somehow, his relationship with Celeste had become entangled in a decades-old conflict he hadn't known existed. As the hour of the wedding approached, Evelyn returned to her room to find Howard Whitmore waiting for her. He stood by the window, aged but still imposing, his expression a mixture of anger and fear. "I know what you're doing," he said without preamble. "Using your own grandson as a pawn in your revenge scheme." Evelyn regarded him coolly. "Is that what you tell yourself, Howard? That I'm the villain in this story? You disappeared for 30 years. Why come back now? Why target my daughter?" "I didn't target anyone," Evelyn replied calmly. "Julian met Celeste at university. Their relationship has nothing to do with our past." Howard scoffed. "A convenient coincidence." "Not everything is a conspiracy, Howard. Sometimes it's just life bringing things full circle." Evelyn moved to her closet, removing the dress she planned to wear to the ceremony. "Your real concern isn't my presence here, it's what I know, what I can prove." Howard's jaw tightened. "Whatever grievances you think you have..." "I don't think anything," Evelyn cut him off. "I have documentation, proof that you stole my husband's work, proof that you deliberately excluded us from credit and compensation, proof that you threatened and intimidated us when we tried to fight back." "That was business," Howard insisted. "Nothing personal," Evelyn smiled thinly. "Taking credit for another man's life's work isn't personal? Erasing us from history isn't personal?" She stepped closer, her voice dropping. "You stole more than patents and profits, Howard. You stole legacy." Outside, guests were beginning to arrive for the ceremony. The media presence had doubled, with reporters speculating about the viral video and what it might mean for the prominent Whitmore family. In the bridal suite, Celeste sat alone before the mirror, her wedding dress half-fastened, her mind racing with her father's revelations. When a knock came at the door, she expected her mother or a bridesmaid. Instead, Julian entered, looking somber in his tuxedo. "We need to talk," he said. "I know," Celeste replied, tears threatening to spill. "My father told me about your grandparents' invention, about what our family did." Julian sat beside her, taking her hands in his. "Did you know? Before today?" "Of course not," Celeste insisted. "I would have told you. This is awful, Julian. I'm so ashamed." He studied her face, wanting to believe her. "There's more to it than just the invention. Your family erased my grandparents from history. They took more than patents. They took credit for years of work. They took recognition. They took legacy." Celeste wiped away a tear. "I'm not my parents, Julian. I had nothing to do with any of this." "I know," he said softly. "But you benefit from it every day. This house, your lifestyle, your family's reputation. It's all built on what they took from my family." "What are you saying?" Julian took a deep breath. "I'm saying we can't pretend this isn't happening. We can't just walk down the aisle and exchange vows while your family is actively trying to hide what they did to mine." Celeste gripped his hands tighter. "We can fix this. Together. After the wedding." "That's just it," Julian interrupted gently. "There's always a reason to wait, to keep the peace, to not rock the boat. Last night at dinner, when your cousin was mocking my grandmother, you smiled. You didn't stand up. You told me I was overreacting." "I was caught off guard," Celeste protested. "I didn't know what to do." "And that's the problem," Julian said sadly. "When things get uncomfortable, when true character is tested, You've consistently chosen the path of least resistance. As they sat in painful silence, the wedding planner knocked frantically at the door. Celeste, it's time. Everyone is seated. Julian stood, straightening his jacket. I'll see you out there. As he left, Celeste stared at her reflection, wondering who exactly was looking back at her. The Whitmore Estate Gardens had been transformed into a fairy tale wedding venue. White chairs lined a rose-petal-strewn aisle that led to an ornate floral arch. A string quartet played softly as guests found their seats, their conversations hushed and speculative. Security guards kept the press at bay, though telephoto lenses captured the scene from beyond the property line. Several prominent guests had quietly canceled, citing sudden schedule conflicts, but the majority had come, too invested in Whitmore connections to risk offense. Julian stood at the altar, his groomsmen beside him, his expression unreadable. His family sat in the front row on the groom's side, though Evelyn had been seated several rows back, a slight that hadn't gone unnoticed by the increasingly alert guests. A socialite in the third row leaned toward her companion, gesturing subtly toward Evelyn. They put the groom's grandmother in the back row, she whispered. She doesn't exactly match the decor, does she? The companion snickered behind her program, unaware that Julian's sister Ava was recording every word on her phone. The music swelled, signaling Celeste's arrival. Guests stood, turning to watch as Howard Whitmore escorted his daughter down the aisle. Celeste looked ethereal in her designer gown, though her smile seemed forced, and her eyes darted nervously to Julian as she approached. The officiant began the ceremony with practiced solemnity.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Celeste Whitmore and Julian Winters in holy matrimony. As the ceremony proceeded, Julian's gaze drifted to his grandmother, sitting straight-backed and dignified despite her
deliberate placement away from the main family. She met his eyes briefly, her expression one of quiet strength. The officiant asked for the rings, and Julian's young cousin stepped forward with the pillow. Just as the exchange was about to occur, a commotion from the back rows disrupted the moment. Ava had suddenly slumped in her chair, her face pale. "Is there a doctor?" someone called. Evelyn rose immediately, moving to her granddaughter's side while guests murmured and craned their necks to see. Celeste's mother, Vivian, seated in the front row, visibly tensed. "Not now," she hissed to her husband. "Not this nonsense." Howard placed a restraining hand on her arm, but not before several nearby guests had heard her callous remark. Julian left his position at the altar, hurrying to his sister. "Ava, what's wrong?" "Just dizzy," Ava murmured, though her eyes communicated something different to her brother. "Sorry to interrupt." Evelyn helped Ava to her feet. "Let's get you some water, dear. Continue with the ceremony." The officiant cleared, his throat awkwardly. "Shall we proceed?" Julian returned to the altar, his expression now troubled. Celeste reached for his hand, but he seemed distracted, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. "The vows," the officiant prompted gently. Celeste went first, her voice trembling slightly as she promised to love, honor, and cherish Julian for all her days. When it was Julian's turn, he hesitated, looking out at the assembled guests. Celeste's family and business associates largely on one side, his small family contingent on the other. "Julian?" the officiant prompted. Julian took a deep breath. "I had vows prepared, beautiful ones, about how Celeste brought light into my life, how her smile could make the darkest day brighter." He paused, his expression hardening. "But I can't stand here and speak of love and honesty while we're surrounded by lies." A shocked murmur rippled through the crowd, Celeste's face drained of color. "Julian, please," she whispered. "I'm sorry, Celeste," he said, his voice carrying across the now silent gathering. "But are we really going to pretend this is love when we're surrounded by poison? When your family mocks mine, then tries to cover it up? When my grandmother is, seated in the back like an afterthought? When the very foundation of your family's wealth was built by stealing from mine?" Howard Whitmore stood abruptly. "That's enough. This is neither the time nor place." "It never is it?" Julian retorted. "There's never a right time to acknowledge the truth. Well, I'm making the time. Right here, right now." Guests began to whisper frantically. Several pulled out phones discreetly recording despite the no photography signs. Evelyn rose from where she'd been attending to Ava. With quiet dignity, she approached Julian. "Come," she said simply, holding out her hand. Julian took it, turning to Celeste one last time. "I do love you," he said softly. "But I can't marry into a family that refuses to acknowledge their wrongs, that values appearance over substance, that would rather perpetuate injustice than face uncomfortable truths." With that, he followed his grandmother down the aisle, past the shocked faces of the guests. Ava quickly joined them, then Barbara and Thomas forming a unified front as they exited the garden. Celeste stood frozen at the altar, humiliation and heartbreak warring on her face. Her mother rushed to her side while Howard conferred urgently with their security team. "Get those photographers off the property," he ordered. "No one releases any images from this debacle." But it was too late. Despite the security team's efforts, images of Julian's departure were already circulating online, accompanied by speculation and rumor. The Sir Whitmore wedding shame hashtag exploded with new content, each post driving the family further into crisis. That evening, in a secure office across town, Evelyn sat before a computer, methodically working through digital files. Her fingers moved deftly across the keyboard as she attached documents to emails, entered password sequences, and activated dormant accounts. A secure phone on the desk rang once. She answered it without preamble. "It's done," she said simply. "Send everything to the list I provided. Financial records, patent documentation, correspondence, all of it." On the other end, a professional voice confirmed, "The federal agencies have been notified. The financial press has received the initial package. Social media influencers are primed with the historical timeline. By morning, it will be everywhere." Evelyn ended the call, then opened a folder containing decades-old photographs, her late husband in his laboratory, demonstrating the cardiac device he'd invented, Evelyn herself presenting data to a medical conference, both of them receiving an award that had later been scrubbed from official records. Next to these, she placed recent clippings about Whitmore Industries' market dominance in medical technology, all built on the foundation of that initial stolen innovation. "This is only the beginning," she whispered to herself, closing the folder. Across town, Julian sat in his apartment, staring at his phone as messages from Celeste accumulated unanswered. A knock at the door roused him from his thoughts. Celeste stood in the hallway, still in her wedding dress, though her carefully styled hair had come undone and her makeup was streaked with tears. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. Julian stepped aside, allowing her entry. She moved to the center of his living room, a vision in white against his modest furnishings. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "About your grandmother, about the patents, about all of it?" "I didn't know until yesterday," Julian replied. "My grandmother kept her past private even from us. I only learned the truth when your father recognized her." Celeste sank onto his couch, the voluminous dress pooling around her. "I feel like I don't know anything anymore. My whole life has been a fiction." "Not all of it," Julian said gently. "What we had was real." "Then why couldn't you go through with it? We could have fixed things together from the inside." Julian shook his head sadly. "That's what I thought too at first. But then I watched how your family handled Brandon's toast, how they seated my grandmother in the back, how they tried to minimize and cover up rather than acknowledge and apologize." He sat across from her, his expression somber. "Every time there was a choice between doing what was right and doing what was expedient, you chose expediency." "That's not fair," Celeste protested. "I was caught in the middle." "Exactly," Julian agreed. "And you stayed there. You never took a side. You looked away too many times, Celeste." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "So that's it? 3 years together? And you throw it all away because of ancient history?" "It's not ancient history," Julian corrected her. "It's ongoing. Your family is still profiting from what they stole. They're still erasing my grandparents' contributions. They're still treating us like we should be grateful to be allowed into their world." Celeste wiped her tears, a spark of anger replacing her sorrow. "And your grandmother? Using our wedding as the stage for her revenge? That's somehow better? She didn't plan this, Julian said. She didn't orchestrate our relationship or time things this way. But when the opportunity arose to finally set things right, she took it. Can you honestly say that's wrong? Celeste stood, gathering the layers of her dress. I don't know what's right anymore. I just know that I lost you today, and it feels like I lost myself too. As she moved toward the door, she turned back one last time. Whatever happens next, with my family, with the press, with all of it, I want you to know I really did love you, Julian. I know, he said softly. That's what makes this so hard. After she left, Julian stood at his window, watching Celeste's car pull away. His phone buzzed with a text from his grandmother. Turn on the news. Every major network was breaking the story. Whitmore Industries under federal scrutiny. Allegations of intellectual property theft dating back decades. Evidence suggesting systematic erasure of the contributions of Black inventors and scientists, particularly Dr. James Winters and his wife Evelyn Hart Winters. As Julian watched the empire begin to crumble, he felt no joy, only a somber sense that justice, too long delayed, was finally being served. In a secure location across town, Evelyn watched the same reports, her expression unreadable. This wasn't celebration. It was vindication, the beginning of a reckoning long overdue. This is only the beginning, she whispered, again, her voice barely audible above the television's urgent reporting. The morning after the wedding disaster, the Whitmore mansion descended into chaos. Black SUVs with government plates lined the circular driveway, and men in suits moved with purposeful efficiency through the once pristine grounds. Federal agents presented Howard Whitmore with a thick stack of documents, his lawyer's face turning ashen as he skimmed the contents. Search and seizure. Howard's voice cracked with disbelief. On what grounds? The lead agent, a stern woman with gray-streaked hair, handed him another document. Financial fraud, intellectual property theft, tax evasion, and obstruction of justice for starters. We have a warrant for all financial records dating back to 1983. Howard's lawyer pulled him aside, whispering urgently, "Don't say another word. This is serious, Howard. Those documents they're citing, they shouldn't exist. Someone had access to internal records." Outside the estate gates, news vans created a media encampment. Reporters thrust microphones at anyone, entering or leaving, their questions sharp and relentless. Is it true the Whitmore fortune was built on stolen patents? What can you tell us about Evelyn Hart Winters? Was the wedding cancellation related to the federal investigation? Headlines blasted across every major outlet. Wedding scandal leads to massive financial probe of Whitmore empire. Evelyn's name remained conspicuously absent from most reports, a calculated omission that would make the eventual revelation all the more explosive. In the mansion's east wing, Vivian Whitmore paced frantically, phone pressed to her ear as she barked orders at the family's crisis management team. I don't care what it costs. Kill this story. Buy whoever you need to buy. Howard burst into the room, slamming the door behind him. His face was flushed with rage and fear. It's worse than we thought, he growled. She owns 39% of our legacy brand. 39%, through a shell corporation called E. Hart Winters Holdings. Vivian sank onto a chaise lounge, her perfectly manicured hand trembling as she covered her mouth. How is that possible? We would have known. She's been inside the walls this whole time, Howard muttered, pouring himself a generous scotch despite the early hour. Watching, waiting, building her case year after year while we thought we were untouchable. What do? Howard downed his drink in one swallow. Call the board. Call our offshore bankers. We move everything tonight before they freeze the accounts. Across town, in her luxury penthouse suite, Celeste sat alone on the edge of her bed. Still in her wedding dress from the night before, she stared blankly at the television as every news channel dissected her family's downfall and her public humiliation. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends, colleagues, and countless reporters, all seeking comments or expressing performative sympathy. She scrolled through photos of her and Julian, memories of 3 years together now tainted by revelations she could barely process. With each picture, she deleted another moment, Another false promise of their future. Wedding gifts sat unopened in the corner, mocking reminders of celebrations that would never happen. A news alert interrupted her thoughts. Exclusive. Whitmore Industries accused of decades-long scheme to appropriate black inventors' work. The accompanying video showed grainy footage of Julian's grandfather receiving an award that history had later attributed to Howard Whitmore. Celeste turned off the television, unable to bear any more truth. Meanwhile, Julian returned to his modest apartment, emotionally exhausted. His grandmother had carefully orchestrated her departure after the wedding fiasco, heading to a secure location with her team of advisors. He understood her need for space and security, but part of him resented being left to deal with the aftermath alone. A knock at his door revealed his sister Ava, carrying coffee and bagels. "Thought you might need breakfast," she said, her usual boundless energy subdued. "It's crazy out there. Reporters camped outside Mom's house all night." Julian accepted, the coffee gratefully. "Any word from Grandma?" "Not directly, but she's all over the news, even though they don't know it yet." Ava pulled out her phone, showing him trending social media posts. People are piecing it together, the connection between Grandpa's patents and Whitmore's medical division. Someone leaked old conference photos where Grandma and Grandpa presented their research. "How much did you know?" Julian asked suddenly. Studying his sister's face, Ava hesitated. "Not everything, but more than you. Grandma started telling me things last year, said I needed to understand our family legacy because I'm like her." She smiled slightly. "Strategic, she called it." Julian nodded, processing this revelation. "And the collapse at the wedding? That was strategic too?" "It got you away from the altar before you made a huge mistake," Ava replied unapologetically. "Consider it my wedding gift to you." In his downtown office, Howard's attempts to transfer company assets hit an immediate wall. The banks refused all movement of funds, citing regulatory holds and compliance concerns. "What do you mean you can't process the transfer?" he shouted into the phone. "I own this company." The bank executive on the other end cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Actually, sir, according to our records, Hart Winters Holdings has lodged a formal objection through their board representatives. Without dual authorization, we cannot proceed with transactions of this magnitude." Howard slammed down the phone, his world collapsing around him. One by one, longtime business partners began to distance themselves. By noon, 3 major investors had publicly announced they were re-evaluating their relationship with Whitmore Industries. The stock price plummeted as trading volume surged, triggering multiple circuit breakers. That afternoon, at an exclusive downtown club, Evelyn Hart Winters met with Marcus Daniels, Whitmore's largest investor outside the family. The elderly woman's composed demeanor contrasted sharply with Marcus's obvious anxiety. "Mrs. Winters," he began, fidgeting with his water glass, "I want to assure you that I had no knowledge of the original situation with your husband's patents." "Of course you didn't," Evelyn replied smoothly. "You came on board in 1996, well, after Howard had sanitized the records." Marcus studied her with newfound respect and fear. "What exactly do you want from this meeting?" Evelyn smiled slightly. "Not revenge, if that's what worries you. Justice and correction. The company's fundamentals remain strong despite Howard's leadership. With proper restructuring and new management, shareholders needn't suffer for his sins." "You're proposing a takeover." "I'm proposing salvation," Evelyn countered. "My holding company already controls 39%. With your 17% and a few other silent partners I've cultivated over the years, we can remove Howard without destroying what thousands of employees have built." Marcus considered her offer, recognition dawning in his eyes. "You've been planning this for decades." "I've been patient," Evelyn corrected him. "There's a difference." The media circus intensified when Celeste's Aunt Helen, Howard's younger sister who had long been pushed to the periphery of family affairs, broke down during an ambush interview outside her home. "Of course I remember Evelyn Hart Winters," she said, tears streaming down her face. "She wasn't just James Winters' wife. She was brilliant, the real architect behind much of what we claimed. Howard made us all complicit in erasing her. Looking directly into the camera, she added, "I'm sorry, Evelyn. We should have stood up to him decades ago." The act ended with Celeste alone in her hotel room, watching her family's carefully constructed facade crumble on every news network. The dynasty her father had taught her to revere was revealed as a house built on theft and deception. She finally understood the uncomfortable feeling she'd always carried, the sense that their privilege rested on something unseen and unacknowledged. With deliberate movements, she scrolled through her phone to the photos of her and Julian one. Last time before deleting them all, along with their message history, their shared calendar, their future. The Whitmore name, once her greatest asset, now felt like a burden she wasn't sure she could bear. 3 days after the wedding that never was, Julian sat in his apartment, surrounded by journalists' business cards and unanswered messages. His phone rang, his grandmother's private number. "It's time you knew everything," Evelyn said without preamble. "Come to the address I'm sending you, come alone." The location turned out to be a nondescript office building downtown. A security guard escorted Julian to a basement level, where Evelyn waited before a reinforced door with a sophisticated electronic lock. She entered a complex code, then pressed her palm to a scanner. "Welcome to the truth," she said as the heavy door swung open. Julian stepped into what appeared to be a private archive. Climate-controlled glass cases lined the walls, filled with documents, photographs, and technological artifacts. At the center stood a large table with leather portfolios arranged in chronological order. "What is this place?" Julian asked, turning slowly to take it all in. "My insurance policy, my testimony, my life's work." Evelyn moved to the first case, which contained black and white photographs of a young couple in a laboratory setting. "Your grandfather and I met at Howard University in 1962, both of us brilliant, both of us foolish enough to believe that merit would overcome prejudice." She guided Julian through the exhibits chronologically, telling him the story that had been hidden for decades. Through letters, patents, photographs, and news clippings, a picture emerged of two scientific pioneers whose groundbreaking work had been systematically appropriated. "We developed the cardiac monitoring system in our garage," Evelyn explained, showing Julian the original prototype. "James had the medical expertise, but I had the engineering background. Together, we created something revolutionary." Julian examined the device, noting how similar it was to the one still used in hospitals worldwide, the flagship product of Whitmore Medical Technologies. "We needed funding for clinical trials," Evelyn continued. "In those days, banks wouldn't lend to black entrepreneurs, especially not for medical technology. So we approached Whitmore Industries, then just a small manufacturing company. Howard's father offered us a deal. They would finance the trials in exchange for manufacturing rights." She opened a portfolio containing the original contract. "What we didn't realize was that the fine print essentially transferred all intellectual property to them once the product was market-ready. When we objected, they simply froze us out, claimed James was merely a consultant, that the actual innovation came from their R&D team." Julian's anger grew as he moved through the timeline, seeing newspaper clippings where his grandfather's contributions were minimized, then erased entirely. "Why didn't you fight back? Sue them?" Evelyn's laugh held no humor. "With what resources? Against their army of lawyers? In a legal system that still saw us as second-class citizens?" She shook her head. "We tried. For 2 years we fought through proper channels. Then James had his first heart attack from the stress. That's when I changed strategies." She led Julian to another section, this one documenting her transformation. "In my youth, I was denied business licenses because of my race. So I created proxies and offshore trusts. I built a hidden network of investments specifically designed to fly under the radar." Julian examined photographs of Evelyn with powerful figures in finance and politics, always in the background, always watching and learning. While James focused on new inventions, I focused on building power. When banks wouldn't lend to me directly, I found white business partners who would front the applications. When companies wouldn't hire me, I bought shares and influenced them through proxies. "All this time," Julian murmured, "we thought you were just Grandpa's supportive wife." "That was by design," Evelyn replied. "The world wasn't ready to acknowledge a black woman as a strategic power player. My invisibility became my strength. She moved to a section devoted to Whitmore Industries, revealing decades of meticulously gathered evidence, financial irregularities, tax avoidance schemes, discriminatory hiring practices, and the systematic appropriation of innovations from smaller companies. My greatest regret, Evelyn said softly, touching a photograph of her husband in his laboratory, was not fighting publicly when the Whitmores took your grandfather's name off the patent for the cardiac monitor. He died believing his contribution would be forgotten. Julian studied his grandmother's face, seeing the steel beneath her gentle exterior. Why didn't you tell me any of this? All these years, I thought you were just my strict grandmother who wanted me to study hard and stand up straight. Evelyn smiled sadly. If I raised you to believe the world owed you kindness, you would have been broken by now. She took his hands in hers. I raised you to be strong, to be prepared, to understand that justice sometimes requires patience. Did you know? When I started dating Celeste? Did you plan this? Evelyn shook her head. Life has its own poetry. Julian, I didn't orchestrate your relationship. But when I realized who she was, I knew the universe was offering me a chance I'd waited decades for. Not revenge, restoration. Later that afternoon, Evelyn held a private press briefing at a downtown hotel. Journalists from major outlets crowded the small conference room, recording devices capturing every word as she delivered a calm, cutting statement. History doesn't always repeat. Sometimes it just waits. 40 years ago, my husband and I created technology that has saved millions of lives. That technology was taken from us through legal manipulation and racial discrimination. Today, I am not seeking vengeance, but correction, the restoration of truth and credit where it belongs. She outlined her demands: acknowledgement of her husband's contributions, renaming of the cardiac division in his honor, establishment of a foundation to support Black innovators in medicine, and a complete restructuring of Whitmore Industries. Leadership. Celeste watched the briefing live from her hotel room, finally seeing the full extent of the truth. How her family had systematically erased someone who had once saved them from bankruptcy with revolutionary technology. She recognized Evelyn's strategic brilliance, her decades of patient work building leverage, while the Whitmores grew complacent in their stolen success. That evening, a hastily organized charity gala honored Evelyn for her lifetime contributions to medical technology. Former business rivals now praised her foresight and determination. A senator who had long been aligned with the Whitmores approached her discreetly. You outplayed us all, he admitted quietly. Howard never saw it coming. Howard saw only what he wanted to see, Evelyn replied. A world where people like me remained invisible. At the Whitmore estate, now half empty as federal agents continued their investigation, Vivian found her husband in his study, surrounded by empty bottles and shredded documents. The board voted, she said flatly. You're out. Effective immediately. Howard barely reacted, his arrogance finally broken by reality. She took everything. No, Vivian corrected him coldly. She reclaimed what was hers. Later that night, Vivian appeared at Evelyn's hotel suite, her designer outfit incongruous with her desperate expression. Please, she begged, all pretense of superiority gone. My children, my grandchildren, they don't deserve to lose everything because of Howard's actions. Show mercy. Evelyn regarded her calmly. Mercy? Like the mercy you showed when you seated me in the back row at my grandson's wedding? Like the mercy you showed when you laughed at your nephew's racist jokes? That was different. No, Evelyn cut her off. It was the same. You used your daughter's wedding as a PR move, a social climbing exercise. Now you reap what that sowed. She opened the door, signaling the end of their conversation. Justice doesn't ask permission, Vivian. Neither does consequence. After Vivian left, Evelyn returned to her temporary home, a comfortable but modest apartment she'd maintained for years under a different name. There, she opened a wall safe and removed a portrait of her late husband, James Winters, beaming proudly in his laboratory coat. She placed it on her mantel, next to a recent photograph of herself with Julian. "It's done, James," she whispered to the image. "They finally know your name." The next morning, Julian visited Evelyn before she conducted another round of interviews. He found her calmly drinking tea, reviewing documents with her legal team. "The stock prices are stabilizing," he told her. "The new board is implementing your recommendations." Evelyn nodded, satisfied. "And what about you? How are you holding up?" Julian sat beside her, considering the question. "I'm still processing everything. The family history, the Whitmores, Celeste." He trailed off, his pain still evident. "Do you regret walking away?" "No," he said firmly. "I regret not seeing the truth sooner, but I don't regret my decision." A marriage built on such an uneven foundation couldn't have lasted. Evelyn studied him proudly. "Your grandfather would have been so proud of you, not just for walking away from that altar, but for standing firmly in your truth." She dismissed her legal team with a gesture, then opened her briefcase and removed a small box. Inside was a letter, yellowed with age, addressed to "My grandchildren." "James wrote this before he died," she explained. "He knew he wouldn't live to see our work recognized, but he believed that someday the truth would emerge. He wanted his descendants to understand what we fought for." Julian carefully unfolded the letter, his grandfather's elegant handwriting bringing tears to his eyes. "To those who carry our blood and name, never shrink to fit rooms that weren't built for you. Instead, build your own rooms, with doors wide, enough for everyone deserving to enter." The act ended with Evelyn placing the portrait of James back in its rightful place, no longer hidden in a safe, but prominently displayed where all visitors could see. The legacy was no longer buried, no longer stolen. After decades in shadow, the truth finally stood in light. 6 months after the wedding that never was, a cold winter morning found Howard Whitmore standing on the steps of the federal courthouse, cameras flashing as reporters shouted questions. His once commanding presence had diminished, his designer suit hanging loosely on his frame, dark circles shadowing his eyes. His attorney stood protectively at his side as the indictment was read to the assembled press. Howard Whitmore, former CEO of Whitmore Industries, has been indicted on 17 counts including fraud, forgery, intellectual property theft, tax evasion, and conspiracy. If convicted on all counts, he faces up to 30 years in federal prison. The attorney quickly ushered Howard into a waiting car, but not before the cameras captured his expression, a mixture of disbelief and resignation, as if he still couldn't comprehend how his carefully constructed world had collapsed so completely. Back at what remained of the Whitmore estate, half its acreage already sold to cover mounting legal fees, Vivian supervised movers packing crystal and artwork. The board had frozen most of their assets pending the investigation's outcome, leaving the family with a fraction of their former wealth. "Be careful with that," she snapped, as a worker wrapped a porcelain vase. "It's worth more than you'll make in a decade." The worker said nothing but exchanged glances with her colleague. Everyone knew the Whitmore story now. Their fall from grace had been spectacular and public, detailed in a special report that had aired nationally the previous week. Across town in a modest classroom at Riverside Community College, Julian stood before a group of attentive students, most of them adults returning to education after years in the workforce. "Financial literacy isn't just about understanding money," he explained, moving between desks with easy confidence. "It's about understanding power, who has it, how they use it, and how you can build it for yourself and your community." After walking away from the altar 6 months earlier, Julian had declined numerous offers to capitalize on his sudden notoriety. No tell-all book deals, no exclusive interviews, no reality show appearances. Instead, he had quietly accepted a teaching position at the community college, focusing on courses in business ethics and financial planning for underserved communities. After class, a young woman approached his desk. "Professor Winters, I just wanted to say thank you. My family has been stuck in a cycle of payday loans for years. Your strategies for building credit and saving are really helping us." Julian smiled, remembering his grandmother's lessons about building foundations. "That's exactly why I'm here. Small changes compound over time." That evening, Julian returned to his new apartment. smaller than his previous place but deliberately chosen to be walking distance from the college. His sister Ava waited in the lobby, camera equipment in tow. "Ready for our meeting?" she asked, bouncing with her characteristic energy. At 23, Ava had channeled her social media savvy into something more substantial. With funding from anonymous donors, though Julian suspected his grandmother's involvement, she had begun production on a documentary series chronicling Evelyn's life and the larger history of Black innovators whose contributions had been erased or appropriated. "The streaming service loved the first cut," Ava explained as they walked. "They're talking about a 6-part series now instead of just 3. People are fascinated by Grandma, this quiet, dignified woman who outmaneuvered corporate titans at their own game." Julian smiled at his sister's enthusiasm. "How is she handling the attention?" "You know, Grandma, giving them just enough to keep them interested, but keeping the real depth for family." Ava adjusted her camera bag. "She wants you to have this, by the way." She handed Julian a small wooden box. Inside was a handwritten letter on Evelyn's distinctive stationery, addressed to my grandchildren's children. "She wrote it years ago," Ava explained. "A letter to future generations, warning them to never shrink to fit rooms that weren't built for them." Julian traced the elegant handwriting with his finger. "She always played the long game, didn't she? Thinking generations ahead while we were worried about next week. That's why she won," Ava replied simply. Across town, the prestigious event planning firm that had orchestrated what should have been the society wedding of the year filed a lawsuit against the Whitmore family. The complaint cited breach of contract, defamation, and damages to their reputation resulting from the viral scandal. "Our client's business has suffered substantially from association with the Whitmore name," their attorney told reporters. "High-profile clients have canceled contracts, worth millions. The damage is ongoing and significant." This new legal challenge added to the growing circus surrounding the Whitmore downfall. Tabloids tracked their every move, documentaries dissected their rise and fall, and late-night comedians found endless material in their disgrace. In Switzerland, Vivian's sister escaped the media frenzy by fleeing the country, ostensibly for health treatments, but actually to avoid potential subpoenas in her brother-in-law's case. Other extended family members publicly distanced themselves, claiming they had always had concerns about Howard's business practices. Celeste Whitmore, however, made a different choice. While her mother urged her to join relatives in Europe, until the scandal died down, she chose to stay in the city, moving from her luxury penthouse to a modest one-bedroom apartment. On a bright spring morning, Julian was surprised to receive a text from an unknown number. "I'm back in town. Could we talk? No pressure. Just closure. Celeste." They met at a quiet cafe far from their usual haunts. Julian arrived first, choosing a corner table away from windows. When Celeste entered, he almost didn't recognize her. Gone were the designer, clothes, and perfect blowout. Instead, she wore simple jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "I know you probably had 100 reasons to decline." Julian studied her face, thinner now, with a new kind of awareness in her eyes. "You look different." "I am different," she acknowledged. "Everything's different now." They ordered coffee, falling into an awkward silence until Celeste finally spoke. "I'm not here to try to win you back or apologize for my family. I just wanted you to know that I understand now." She clutched her mug tightly. "I've been volunteering at a youth center in my neighborhood. Last week, a 13-year-old girl told me about her science project, an incredible innovation for water filtration, and how her teacher gave credit to her lab partner instead." Julian nodded, understanding the parallel. "For the first time, I truly understood what your grandparents went through," Celeste continued. "Not just intellectually, but emotionally. The injustice of having your work, your ideas, your contributions simply erased. It changes people," Julian said quietly. "Living with that kind of erasure." Celeste met his eyes. "I want you to know I've cut ties with most of my family's money. I'm working at a women's shelter now, using my background in event planning to help with their fundraisers. That's good, Celeste. I'm glad you found something meaningful. She hesitated, then asked, Can we ever be friends, Julian? Not now, not soon, but someday? Julian considered the question carefully. Some things can't be undone, he finally said. But people can change. I believe that. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was acknowledgement, recognition that she, too, was on a journey toward understanding. That evening, Julian received an unexpected package. Inside was a small black velvet box containing the engagement ring he had given Celeste, along with a note. This belongs with you now. I hope it finds a worthy hand someday. The gesture brought unexpected tears, not for what might have been, but for the growth they had both experienced through loss. The wedding planner's lawsuit against the Whitmores proceeded rapidly through the courts, adding another layer of public humiliation to their downfall. Media coverage framed it as another example of the family's hubris coming back to haunt them, one more brick falling from a crumbling empire. As spring turned to summer, Celeste's mother left the country, unable to bear the continued scrutiny and social rejection. She retreated to a small villa in southern France, funded by assets hidden years earlier in anticipation of possible trouble. Celeste chose to stay, rebuilding her life from scratch. She shared a statement with select media outlets, not defending her family but acknowledging her own complicity through silence and indifference. I benefited from systems of privilege and injustice without questioning their foundations, she wrote. That ignorance wasn't innocent. It was cultivated and protected. I am committed to spending my life dismantling what my family helped build. The statement received mixed reactions. Some praised her courage. Others dismissed it as reputation management. Julian, reading it over breakfast, recognized the sincerity behind the words, the beginning of genuine reckoning. On a warm Sunday afternoon, Julian and Evelyn visited the cemetery where his grandfather was buried. They placed fresh flowers on the simple headstone, standing together in comfortable silence before Evelyn spoke. When your grandfather died, I made him a promise, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. I told him I wouldn't just survive. I would rewrite the story, not just for us, but for everyone whose contributions were erased. Julian took her hand, feeling the strength that had sustained her through decades of patient work. You kept that promise. We did more than survive, Evelyn said softly. We're rewriting. In the financial press, Evelyn emerged as a mysterious, brilliant force, a strategist compared to business titans and civil rights pioneers. She neither confirmed nor denied any titles, allowing her actions to speak louder than words. Behind the scenes, she worked with a team of lawyers and financial experts to establish a reparations initiative funded by recovered assets from Whitmore Industries. The fund wasn't established under her name, but under her late husband's, James Winter's Innovation Fund, restoring what was once stolen and ensuring that his legacy would benefit future generations of inventors from marginalized communities. As Julian watched his grandmother navigate her newfound public recognition with characteristic grace, he realized that her victory wasn't about revenge or even vindication. It was about restoration, of truth, of honor, of names that had been deliberately erased from history. The act ended with the first disbursement from the James Winter's Innovation Fund, supporting a young black woman whose medical technology research echoed the brilliant work James and Evelyn had begun decades earlier. When asked by reporters about the significance of the grant, Evelyn simply said, "The circle completes itself, but the work continues." 5 years later, a new gala was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The crowd was distinguished but diverse. Academics, inventors, philanthropists, and community leaders gathered to celebrate the launch of an inner-city educational initiative called the Winters Foundation. Julian, now the foundation's director, stood at the podium in a well-tailored suit, his confident presence drawing the room's attention. Education isn't just about information, he told the audience. It's about transformation, about giving young people the tools to build futures that aren't limited by other people's perceptions or prejudices. In the front row, Evelyn sat quietly, her silver hair elegantly styled, her face showing pride but not triumph, as she watched her grandson continue the work she had begun. At 78, she had gradually stepped back from public life, entrusting the family's various initiatives to Julian and Ava, while maintaining strategic oversight from behind the scenes. After the speeches, as guests mingled and networked, a distinguished film director approached Evelyn. "Mrs. Winters, I just wanted to tell you how much your granddaughter's documentary affected me. It's changed how we discuss innovation and credit in my industry." Evelyn smiled graciously. Ava has her grandfather's vision and her own unique voice, a powerful combination. Across the room, Ava, now 28 and respected in documentary filmmaking, accepted an award for her series, Erased: The Untold Stories of Black Innovation in America. The project had begun with her grandmother's story, but expanded to include dozens of similar cases across scientific and creative fields. In her acceptance speech, she acknowledged the journey that had begun with a viral video at a disastrous wedding. "My grandmother taught me that legacy isn't what you leave behind," she said, her voice strong and clear. "It's what you force into the light." Julian declined increasingly prominent offers to join national political campaigns or take corporate board positions, choosing instead to focus on direct community impact through the foundation's work. "The spotlight changes nothing," he explained to a persistent recruiter. "The work matters more. The daily, unglamorous effort of creating opportunity where it's been systematically denied." His words echoed his grandmother's philosophy: substance, overshow, strategic patience over quick victories. The Whitmore name had faded from public consciousness. After Howard's conviction and imprisonment for financial crimes, the family corporations were either absorbed by competitors or dissolved entirely. The family retreated into obscurity, their social connections evaporating along with their wealth and influence. Only Celeste maintained a presence in the city, continuing her work with women's shelters and gradually building a reputation based on genuine commitment rather than family connections. She and Julian occasionally crossed paths at nonprofit events, their interactions cordial if somewhat reserved. The hurt had healed into something quieter, mutual respect for the different paths they had chosen. On a crisp fall morning, Evelyn received a formal letter from the White House inviting her to accept the Presidential Medal of Freedom for her contributions to medical innovation and business ethics. "A great honor," said her assistant, already planning logistics. Evelyn considered the embossed invitation thoughtfully before setting it aside. "Tell them I'm grateful but must decline. Suggest instead they recognize the collective contributions of the innovators highlighted in Ava's documentary." "But Mrs. Winters, this is the nation's highest civilian honor." Evelyn smiled enigmatically. "Let them come find me when the truth matters more than the optics." Instead of accepting national accolades, Evelyn attended the opening of a small but significant exhibit at the National Museum of African American History. The centerpiece was a life-sized bronze statue of Evelyn and James Winters, standing side by side, holding the blueprints for their cardiac monitoring device, the innovation that had changed medicine and, through its theft and eventual reclamation, changed their family's trajectory. The plaque beneath the statue read simply, "James and Evelyn Hart Winters. Their vision saved lives. Their perseverance secured justice." Julian stood beside his grandmother as she gazed at the bronze likeness of her younger self. "Is it strange?" he asked. "Seeing yourself memorialized this way?" "Not strange," Evelyn replied after a moment's consideration. "Necessary, not for my ego, but for the record, for history, to acknowledge what was deliberately erased." As they left the museum, reporters waited outside, hoping for a statement about the exhibit or her declined presidential honor. Evelyn walked past them with a polite smile but no comment, her hand resting lightly on Julian's arm for support. The following week, Julian presented plans for a new community center in the neighborhood where his grandparents had once lived and worked. The building would include a state-of-the-art makerspace, coding lab, and business incubator. But the crown jewel would be its library, named after Evelyn. "Will you come see it when construction starts?" he asked his grandmother over Sunday dinner. Evelyn nodded, though something in her expression suggested she was already looking beyond this project to horizons Julian couldn't yet see. "Just once," she said. "The rest is for you to build." 3 months later, without announcement or fanfare, Evelyn Hart Winters disappeared from public life. She sold her city apartment, transferred operational control of her remaining business interests to Julian, and moved to a small farmhouse in rural Vermont that she had purchased decades earlier under another name. There, surrounded by fields and forests rather than boardrooms and cameras, she planted a garden, read voraciously, and corresponded with a small circle of trusted associates. Her strategic mind remained sharp, her influence still felt in decisions made by the foundations and initiatives she had established, but her direct presence faded like a deliberate watermark, visible only when you knew exactly where to look. 1 spring morning. A young girl from a neighboring farm spotted Evelyn tending to her sunflowers. Curious, she approached the fence. "Are you the woman from the news?" she asked bluntly. "The one who took down that big company?" Evelyn smiled, removing her gardening gloves to shake the child's hand properly. "I used to be," she replied. Neither confirming nor denying. "And who might you be?" "Amara Johnson. I'm going to be an inventor when I grow up." "A worthy ambition," Evelyn said, studying the girl's intelligent eyes. "Would you like to hear a story about an inventor I once knew?" As Evelyn shared a simplified version of her husband's work, carefully omitting the painful parts of their journey, she recognized in the child's attentive gaze the same hunger for knowledge, the same determination that had characterized her own youth. When Amara left, promising to return the following day for more stories, Evelyn returned to her gardening with renewed purpose. The seeds she had planted, both literal and figurative, would continue to grow long after she was gone. The story closed as she watched the sun rise over her field of sunflowers. Their faces turned eastward toward the light. Her legacy secured, not in buildings or bank accounts, but in the changed landscape of possibility for those who would come after her. Her family safe. Her silence finally broken. Her truth finally known. In the distance, Julian's car appeared on the rural road, coming. To visit? To share news of the Foundation's latest success, to continue learning from the woman who had taught him that justice, like all worthwhile things, required both vision and patience. As she raised her hand in greeting, Evelyn's expression held, not triumph but contentment, the quiet satisfaction of a strategist whose long game had finally perfectly played out. Was justice served? Or was it revenge? And how long would you wait to reclaim what was rightfully yours? If this story of patience, power, and long overdue reckoning captivated you, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of justice served cold.